Brad Farmer from Australia.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Today I'm representing National Surf Reserves in Australia, and my co-author of this presentation is Professor Andrew Short, considered in Australia the world's, well, at least the foremost authority on beaches, and he and I worked very closely together on this presentation and a number of books together. So on behalf of Andy, myself and the entire National Surfing Reserves, we are privileged to be here to make this presentation. And I said in the spirit of aloha, Duke Kanamoku came to Manly in Australia in 1914 and shared with us, offered us the love and spirit of surfing, and the same spirit we offer to you, the aloha, and this idea, this template possibly for the protection of waves worldwide. Curiously enough, Duke Kanamoku surfed freshwater in Manly on the northern beaches of Sydney, and recently Manly was declared a National Surf Reserve, number 8 or 9 in Australia, and it will be declared a World Surf Reserve in February, all things given, in February of 2012, next year. This has been 20 years in advocacy and 15 minutes in the presentation. I'll make it a very quick snapshot if I can. There are thousands of people involved in Australia and across the world, and millions have witnessed our program over the last 20 years through media and so on. This is a new and successful realisation method of wave protection. Andy and I have written a number of papers, but principally we have chosen or sought to redefine what a surfer might be in order to increase our leverage and advocacy powers within legislature and communities. And I managed to get a picture of Holly Beck, which I promised would get in this presentation, but everyone is a surfer, and I think that's given us a great deal of breadth when we're doing our advocacy and lobbying, and you'll see throughout the presentation how it's helped us. And I said, and I've read some of Chad's work, is that as long as we're perceived as a fringe group, we will be considered so. And I've been encouraging others to broaden the scope, the definition of what a surfer could be for maximum political, economic and social leverage. That was Barack Obama, if you didn't recognise the President of the United States. A National Surfing Reserve is a declared iconic, which we might relate to as a sacred site, the same as Aboriginals would declare Ayers Rock, or you have your examples in your own country, either in legislation or in symbolically. National Surf Reserves, or a surf reserve, was first established in Bells Beach and gazetted in 1973 as a recreation reserve only in the terrestrial zone. The waves weren't protected or recognised, and it was principally done as a method to protect and manage a contest site. In 1993, under the auspices of the Surfrider Foundation, with the help of Steve England from University of Plymouth, one of my interns at Surfrider Foundation, we reinvented surfing reserves on the Gold Coast. It sat for a while, political winds have changed, and Andy Short and I reinvigorated and researched it in 2004 together. Australia is just one big beach. We have 10,685 beaches. Andy Short, my colleague, has been to every one of those beaches. I've only been to about 3,000, a quarter of those. But we have about 100 years of surfing history. As I've mentioned, Duke Kanamoku demonstrated surfboard riding in 1914 at Manly, and we were inspired and fell in love with surfing. But the surf lifesaving or surf bathing started in 1902 in Manly in Australia. About National Surf Reserves, surprisingly, we're non-profit, extremely non-profit. We're run by volunteers. We take no corporate funding. We're never offered any. We have no membership as such. We take some government funding according to particular sites. We have a 99% success rate in Australia, and we maintain the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, and it works beautifully. The same level of protection in the legislation for a surfing reserve in Australia is equivalent to, as we've discussed, a marine park, or at Ningaloo, for example, or a national park. So it carries the same level, the same weight of legislation. NSR is a model for World Surf Reserves, which you'll hear about from Dean in a moment, and we are seed partners with World Surf Reserves. We are actively engaged in global planning and execution of surfing reserves and wave protection And it's been 6 years in Australia, and part of the presentation today is to encourage other nations to take up NSR and WSR. We're fortunate in Bondi Beach last year for Kelly Slater to become our national and global ambassador for both national surfing reserves and world surf reserves. As recently as last week in Peniche, he recommitted to that, and we'll be looking forward to seeing him open and declare Manly a World Surf Reserve, number 3 in the world, in February 2012. For those historians in the room and surf riders, this is the first meeting of Surf Rider Foundation in Australia, and you'll probably recognise Rabbit, who's our current patron of National Surf Reserves, Jim Banks and so on. And when I surfed every day, I was a lot thinner. But that was 20 years ago, and that was beginnings of National Surf Reserves under the Surf Rider Foundation. National Surf Reserves set global standards for national standards. It's the first time in any nation in the world that surfing has been recognised in law, in legislation. Surfing and surfing has been recognised in the Hansard in Australia and in state laws in Australia. So it is a first. In New South Wales, it comes under the Crown Lands Act 1989, and basically it gives surfers primacy in decision-making in the surf zone. In Hawaii, you'd be aware, maybe aware that Senator Fred Hemmings, who's now stepped down from the Senate, a Republican, was fortunate and aggressive in pushing through the Senate Bill 2646 in Hawaii, and through executive order, after some 11th-hour debate, got through 2 surfing reserves with an executive order under Governor Lingle last year. New Zealand, Paul Shanks and I are working together very closely with the Surf Break Protection Society to ensure that those number of breaks under the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement are in fact potentially world surfing or national surfing reserve sites. And I'm glad that we're here together today representing the Antipodes. In the USA, Latin and South America and the EU, well, the Scottish Marine Bill, I've had some discussions. There's potential for the copying or the inspiration of our legislation to be translated to other countries. Excuse me. Why declare a national surfing reserve? To raise awareness, to formally recognise surfers and surfers and the surf culture, and an iconic site. We can call it a spiritual site, those famous sites, if you like, and there are 25 in Australia. To record the surf history of the site. And one of the prerequisites for a local steering committee is they produce a complete history of their area. So it demonstrates they have the capacity. So it brings young, old, Malibu, shortboard riders, all kinds of people together to produce a very substantial document, and it demonstrates that they have the capacity to engage in a process collectively together. So we've seen surfers, you know, the whole community comes together. They're forced to come together in a very synergistic arrangement for community engagement. It's a tremendous model. To empower and galvanise communities and discourage threats early. I take the premise that if Trestles or Mundaka was a surfing reserve, I think that we may not have had the issues we've had now. It would have given us greater leverage and premise for debate. I think National Surf Reserves also allows us to form a form of sovereignty, a claim of sovereignty. We are the logical custodians of the surfing zones, the waves, and as such, we are the owners, if you like, the most likely owners of that area. To create legislative basis for the future and to educate and include governments, media, industry, surfers, public awareness of the sites and surfers. And of course, tourism just loves us, in Australia particularly. What is a National Surf Reserve? I'm aware that I've got a short amount of time, so I'm moving through. A coastal surf reserve or a zone is declared by boundaries and law. It varies, and I'll show you in a moment. A national statement recognising the intrinsic heritage, cultural, environment, sporting and social values of an area, and the voice for surfers in the community, which they previously may not have had, although they may have it through a chapter of the Surf Rider Foundation, for example. It's also a vehicle for engagement and education, and it's self-demonstrating. I encourage you to go to our website later. Manly, I mentioned that this is an early version, but that's an example of a zone. In fact, we've taken it to 1,000 metres by law to include the ferry bow bommy here. So the surf zone there is Manly. It's a National Surf Reserve. That's where the Duke Kanemoku demonstrated surfboard riding, great history, the birthplace of surfing in Australia. In some zones, for example, North Narrabeen is also a National Surf Reserve. We've taken the zoning right through to the estuary system to include any impacts in the tidal zone and creeks and rivers and so on. And the state government has been fantastic, really, in New South Wales accommodating legislation around that. In every surfing reserve we have a plaque that is written by the local people based on the nuances and the environments and characteristics of the area. We always acknowledge the Indigenous people of the area, and that's a 400mm plaque in bronze, placed usually in a stone. They vary from the very raw, that one at Kalbarri, a sculpture at Margaret River, that one at Lennox Head, and again, you know, Shane Horan, Bugs, Michael Peterson, all sorts of people and surfers are right behind us. It's one of the rare occasions that Michael Peterson has actually come out of hiding at Kirra. This is an example of a sign that we put up as you enter the surf reserve, so it's like you're entering the Yellowstone National Park. This one is a crescent head, one of the longest right-hand point breaks in Australia, and I think it was number 5 surfing reserves. How we do it in Australia. We identify and declare iconic sites. We have identified 25 National Surfing Reserve beaches. Out of 10,685 beaches, 1,200 beaches are surfing beaches. We have gradually established a local steering committee guided under the National Executive. We must have the full support of the local community, and it's a bottom-up approach. We give them the template, if you like, and it's driven by the community. If the community don't have the impetus, the motivation, or the collective consciousness, or the gusto to do it, we don't deal with them. It engages all stakeholders right across the board. We have the rollout is 2 national surf reserves a year since 2005. We currently have 11 in Australia. There are 9 legislation, 2 in symbolic, without legislation, 5 more in 2012, which will be 4 on the Gold Coast in February, Phillip Island, Cactus, and Yallingup on December 2, which is just near Margaret River. By 2015, we'll have completed 25 national surf reserves in Australia. We're presently encouraging other nations to create their own national surf reserves. New Zealand, Hawaii, of course, has made that initiative, Indonesia, the European Union, Fiji, and so on. Briefly and importantly, we have those 3 models: national surf reserves, world surf reserves, and for those areas that don't make the grade, that are just average beaches but want to have some recognition, we have a 3rd tier yet to be developed, which will be called a state or regional surf reserve. So we get a lot of applications from groups that just don't make the cut. So we're facilitating them through regional surfing reserves. A graph, but that is a demonstration of the flow chart of how we might create one at Lennox Head, for example, and again, it's available on our website through resources page. Our regional vision, and we have created a global outreach council, if you like, but at the moment, for those who have been to Australia, if you're not, you're all welcome. We'll see you there. The yellow is the existing national surf reserves. The purple is the proposed and currently underway surf reserves. Clearly, there are 9 there in New South Wales. The entire coastline, 135 kilometres of the Cape to Cape, is probably the best selection of waves, they argue, anywhere in the world. Yallingup on December 2, Kalbarri has been declared, Nalu and Red Bluff, the Cactus, Yorke's Peninsula, Phillip Island, and so on, and the Gold Coast 4 breaks, February 24 next year. Any surfing nation can become and start a national surf reserve. A national executive should be formed. A local steering committee works under that, and possibly some government assistance. The base NSR model is available on our website or through me to any nation. The model will vary according to nation. Clearly, there are some nations that are not ready for this type of thing, but it can be customised. It's not a franchise. It's offered in the spirit of aloha, an idea that can be translated and moved from country to country. NSR will be in 5 nations by 2015, and I'll point those out in a moment. And we will collaborate with World Surfing Reserves in 2 complementary protection models, and I've been working very closely with Dean and Katie and Will and team at Save the Waves. By way of interest, as a former federal advisor, I'm also pushing for a Ministry of Coasts in Australia to complement the Ministry for Lands, the Ministry for Fisheries, the Ministries for Forest. We believe there should be a Ministry for Coasts. In addition to that, we are approaching the Commonwealth the COAG, the Council of Australian Governments, to enshrine these sites in Commonwealth legislation as well as state legislation. Those other areas I mentioned, of course, are New Zealand, the rugby winners, Sri Lanka, which I'm visiting on the way back. We have connections to the Aragon Bay Surf Club, for us there. South Africa, our colleague Jim Templer has been down there and talked to people at Super Tubes and Jeffries. Again, they may be candidates for World Surf Reserves rather than National Surf Reserves. Papua New Guinea, Andy Abel at Papua New Guinea Surfers Alliance. We've met with him at Kavieng and Port Moresby. That looks good. Indonesia, of course, we've got 3 applications there in process from NIAS, Uluwatu and G-Land. We probably think it's a very slow process for the Bupati in the government there. We probably think that probably Uluwatu will make an ideal candidate as a World Surf Reserve, but things move very slowly in Indonesia. Fiji is looking good through our contact, Jess Ponting, who has had some time there, Dr. Jess. And finally, as you're probably aware, 2 sites have been recognised in Hawaii. Lennox Head, have you been there? Hey, it's a fabulous wave. It's the longest surf reserve we have at the moment, 7.2 kilometres. So it actually goes around the corner to Flat Rock and Boulders and down here to the Lake Ainsworth. But it's 7.2 kilometres. The plaque is up on the hill here, and it comprises 400 square hectares. It's a beautiful site. A quick snapshot of images. Primarily demonstrate some of the community capacity. Various groups have stones, some have carved waves, some have surfboards. Gives you an idea of the installation that we have. The Gold Coast, for example, is spending $40,000 shortly in putting 3 plaques in the 4 breaks there. There's one at Cronulla, for example, which Occy was our patron, and again, that's a $100,000 expenditure by the local government, which they're extended to $200,000, I might add, in the promenade to celebrate surfing. I want to introduce the idea of sovereignty, which I mentioned earlier, and it occurred to me flying over from Australia that, we talk about sovereignty, national sovereignty, but I'd like to plant that seed that I believe that surfers have the right to the wave zone, and I'd like to plant that seed and perhaps extrapolate it later, but I believe that there is no other subculture or user group that has greater ownership over that zone. Speaking of sovereignty, of course, the Aboriginals in Australia have had a 40,000-year connection with the ocean. They haven't surfed it. It's a bit slow of them, I thought. But at Black Rock in Jarvis Bay, also known as South Coast Pipe Summer Cloud, there will be a first Indigenous surfing reserve, which we're working very closely with the Commonwealth Government and the Indigenous community. And that will be a very significant event, probably mid next year. Fabulous wave. This has not happened overnight, I can assure you. It's been many years in the making, since Bells Beach 73. I waited from 73 till 93, thinking that someone might have picked it up. They didn't. It's been 20 years of advocacy to get the Gold Coast up, for example, next year. Thousands of volunteer hours and a commitment and excellence to the principle of KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid. And Andy Short and I have kept that principle, and it's worked wonderfully. Out of interest, this is our first board meeting. Ben Mundy, Jess Ponting, a couple of people, Peter Garrett, you probably recognise. That was the then Premier of New South Wales, Professor Andy Short, Representative of Surf Lifesaving, our current executive, CEO of Surf Lifesaving, Professor Andy Short, Crown Lands, Chris Toller, surf rider. So there's a nice cross-section. Sorry about the gender equity, they're all guys. But there's an example. Mark Richards was one of our stakeholders and lead committee people at Margaret River, along with the Minister for Tourism there and some of our other board members. In Nalu, for example, which you know is in the very remote part of Western Australia, we have comprehensive and extensive stakeholder engagement with farmers, pastoralists, Aboriginals, and sometimes it's not easy to get surf reserves through. They come to us and ask for it, and there's some community resistance or misunderstanding about what it means in terms of the development. But that was one example where we expect Red Bluff to be the first of 2 national surf reserves in WA. The WA government will not legislate but they will certainly recognise it symbolically. You probably recognise that, and I'm just about to finish up, moderator, we have 4 National Surf Reserves to be declared on February 24 on the Gold Coast. It happens to be my hometown. My family got there in 1840, so I've seen it go in my lifetime of 50 years to a Legoland metropolis of theme parks and crowded breaks. But thankfully, after 20 years, we finally have seen the state and local government step up to the plate, and I'm extremely delighted that finally the Gold Coast will become a National Surf Reserve on February 24, Friday, February 24, 2011. Manly, last couple of slides, Freshwater Beach will be unique because it's the birthplace of Australian surfing, and again, the booklet gives you a demonstration of the history of Manly, and it will be unique in so much as it became a National Surf Reserve, and in Australia we need to have a prerequisite for it to be a National Surf Reserve in order for it to be a World Surf Reserve. So Manly, after Malibu in October last year, Dean, and then Edessea last week, number 2 World Surf Reserve, number 3 will be Manly, a unique position of being both a National Surf Reserve and a World Surf Reserve. What is interesting about that is that we now have the government crawling to be on our local steering committees. In this case, the Mayor of Manly, Jean Hay, who calls herself a beach babe from the 60s, she asked, please, could she be the chairman of the local steering committee? And so an extraordinary dynamic in the government, local government, community perceptions wanting to be involved with National Surf Reserves. The desired outcome of the presentation today would be to see more National Surf Reserves throughout the world, or World Surf Reserves in various countries. And the other thing that I'd like to put to the forum today by way of contribution and to give some thought beyond the exchange of information would be that we consider the seeding of not a new group so much, or a coalition or an alliance, but we might consider calling a commission, so that if we do in fact want to go to UNESCO, United Nations, or other bodies or corporations or countries, that we would consider a strategic development of another commission or a group. It could be a working title of the International Surfing Communities Commission, something like that, formed in Biarritz today. So I'd like to plant that seed by way of discussion as we move on. Our website is a good website, and I just offer my thanks for taking the time to give me this opportunity to share this with you, and I'm happy to take questions if need be. Thank you.